healing doesn't look like what you think. It was a Tuesday morning in early October, the kind of day where the air smelled like old leaves and soft endings. The sun came in filtered, golden, and tired. Brushing gently across the kitchen tiles, Mary stood barefoot by the window, holding a chipped mug of black tea. No sugar, no honey, just the way she'd quietly grown to like it over the years. She had been widowed for 9 months. People had stopped asking how she was after month 3. Grief, she noticed, made people uncomfortable after the casseroles stopped arriving. And though she never blamed them, she also never corrected them when they assumed she was doing better. She wasn't sure what better meant anymore. Her days were simple now. Wake, read, walk, listen to the silence. Try not to cry before noon. She often succeeded. That was something. That morning, as the wind rustled the dried maple leaves outside, Mary opened the door to the small porch and sat in the wooden rocker Thomas had built years ago. It creaked now, but she found the sound comforting, familiar, like an old dog stretching its bones. She looked out across the yard. It had once been full of color: roses, peonies, lavender, and Thomas used to hum while pruning them. Now it was overgrown, fading, but still alive. A little like her, she thought. Everyone had told her that healing would come, that time would do its work, that she'd wake one day and feel whole again. But so far, healing looked nothing like that. It wasn't sudden or gentle, or even especially kind. It was quiet, awkward, tedious. It looked like eating dinner alone at a table built for 2. It looked like sleeping on one side of the bed and pretending it didn't matter. It looked like smiling in public and unraveling in private. Mary took a slow sip of her tea and closed her eyes. The wind brushed across her face like a memory. In the stillness, she heard Thomas's voice, not in words, but in sensation, a weightless presence that came and went with the breeze. He had never been much of a talker, but he had a way of being there without needing to be heard. And maybe that was the lesson. Healing wasn't a return to who she had been. It wasn't a task to finish or a badge to earn. It was learning to sit in the quiet and not flinch, to feel everything without trying to change it. She opened her eyes. A squirrel darted along the fence. Somewhere far off, a child laughed. Life, indifferent and beautiful, continued. Mary placed her hand on the old wooden armrest and whispered, "I don't know what healing is supposed to look like, but maybe it starts with showing up anyway." 2 days later, Mary packed a small bag and left before sunrise. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Not that many people were asking anymore. She just left a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone for a little while. I'll be safe." The road stretched ahead, empty and familiar. She drove with the windows cracked just enough to let in the scent of autumn, dry fields, burning wood, and the faint memory of something softer. Her destination wasn't dramatic, just the lake an hour north, where she and Thomas had once almost gone. Almost. It was the trip they had planned during his last year, the one they kept putting off, saying, "Next spring, when you feel stronger." But spring never came the way they imagined, and the trip turned into another dream filed under "maybe someday." Now she was going, alone, not to reclaim what they missed, but to sit in the place they never reached. The lake greeted her without ceremony. Just still water, golden reeds, and the whisper of wind against the surface. It was smaller than she imagined. Quieter, too. She booked a tiny cabin. Nothing fancy, just a bed, a heater, and a screened porch that looked out over the water. That first evening, she sat by the shore with a wool blanket over her knees and watched the light shift across the ripples. There were no epiphanies, no ghostly signs, just space, and that, strangely, felt sacred. The next morning, she walked the lakeside trail and passed a man sitting on a bench sketching. He looked to be in his 70s. Long gray hair, soft denim shirt, a presence that didn't ask to be noticed. He glanced up and nodded, then returned to his sketch pad. Mary hesitated. Then, surprising herself, she sat on the other end of the bench. Neither spoke for a long while. Eventually, he said without looking up, "You here for the silence too?" She smiled. "I guess I am." He closed his notebook and turned to her. "I lost my wife 7 years ago. Came here once a month since. Not to remember her, just to remember myself." Mary blinked. It was the first time someone had said something about grief that didn't sound like a lesson. "I thought I was supposed to move on," she said softly. He chuckled. "Ah, yes. The great American myth of moving on. I tried that. Left me emptier than the grief ever did." Mary looked out at the water. "I don't know how to heal." He nodded. "Then you're doing it right." They sat there until the wind shifted and geese crossed the lake overhead. Before she left, he said one more thing. "Grief is just love with nowhere to go. But healing is letting it stay, even when it has no destination." Back at the cabin, Mary wrote in her notebook for the first time in months. Not poetry, not a letter to Thomas, just a sentence. "Today I didn't try to escape my grief. I just let it walk beside me without shame." The lake outside shimmered under a thin moon, and in that stillness, Mary realized healing doesn't always look like growing stronger. Sometimes it looks like softening. The house smelled like memory. When Mary opened the door, the quiet greeted her, not with absence, but with familiarity. It no longer felt like a hollow echo of what had been. It felt like a space waiting to be lived in again. She dropped her small bag by the couch and stood in the entryway for a long time. Nothing had changed. The couch with the sagging middle cushion, the picture frames slightly askew, the old bookshelf Thomas built, still bowing under the weight of their shared library. All exactly as she left it, all as it had always been, except for her. She walked slowly into the kitchen, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the counter, the corner where Thomas used to stand with his morning paper. Something inside her had shifted. Not broken, not healed, but softened. That evening, she made herself a meal she hadn't cooked in months. Roasted carrots, warm bread, and lemon soup. The kind Thomas always called comfort in a bowl. She ate at the table, alone but not lonely. And then she did something she hadn't done since the funeral. She cleared the second place setting, not to erase him, but to let herself take up the whole table again. In the following weeks, Mary began rearranging the house. Gently, she kept the photos, but moved them closer to the window. She gave away clothes he never wore, but kept his favorite sweater. She cleared the closet of the things neither of them used. Old electronics, shoes with cracked soles, guilt. One afternoon, she found a box labeled simply M. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor and opened it. Inside were things Thomas had saved. Small things. A note she left in his lunchbox in 1997. A postcard from their first trip to Maine. A photo of her reading under a tree, hair tucked behind her ears, eyes smiling but tired. At the bottom, folded and yellowed, was a note in her handwriting. Someday, if I forget who I am, please remind me that I was more than what I carried. She didn't remember writing it, but somehow she had written exactly what she needed to hear now. That evening, she lit a candle by the windowsill and sat in the rocking chair. Outside, the light was fading again, soft and unhurried. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just rested. Healing, she thought, didn't look like being busy. It looked like making peace with being still. The letter arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a flyer for window replacements and a local coupon booklet. It was the only thing handwritten. The envelope was cream-colored, her name written in a slightly uneven script. She recognized it immediately. It was from Thomas's sister, Elaine. They hadn't spoken since the funeral. Not from anger, just time. Silence. The kind that builds slowly until it feels too heavy to move. Mary had always assumed Elaine needed distance to grieve. Or maybe she thought Mary had needed it more. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. Dear Mary, I've started and stopped this letter 100 times. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't feel either too much or not enough. But this morning, I dreamt of Thomas. He was sitting on your porch, sipping coffee, smiling, and when I asked him what he was thinking, he said, "She's learning to live with the quiet." I woke up crying, not because I was sad, but because it finally felt okay to miss him without it breaking me. Mary paused, pressing the page to her chest. I just wanted you to know. He loved you in every silence, and I'm sorry we didn't talk sooner. Maybe grief isn't something to get over, but something we get better at holding. If you ever want to share tea and quiet, you know where to find me. Signed simply, with love, Elaine. Mary read the letter 3 times before placing it beside her own notebook. That evening, she walked out to the garden, the one she and Thomas had let overgrow. The lavender had returned on its own, wild and imperfect. She didn't trim it. She let it be. She brought out 2 cups of tea, one for her, one for the chair across from her. She didn't talk out loud. She didn't need to. She sat under the wide sky, watching the stars come in slowly, patiently, one by one, and for the first time since the day he left, she didn't feel like healing was something ahead of her. It was around her, beside her, already happening, in the letters, in the silence, in the lavender left uncut, in the tea still poured for 2, in the decision to stay soft, even when it hurt, the end and the gentle truth. Healing doesn't look like forgetting. It doesn't look like a finish line. It often doesn't look like anything from the outside. Sometimes, healing looks like sitting with your grief without asking it to leave. Sometimes, healing just looks like showing up anyway. Thank you for listening. May peace find your evening. Until next time.